60,000 of the grandest buildings ever built, palaces, opera houses, entire fairground cities of plaster and light, vanished so fast that not one complete photograph of them survives. Online, there's a theory for that: a lost global supercivilization, a catastrophic mud flood, a cover-up spanning 2 continents. Tens of thousands of people believe it, on forums with names like Tartaria. They're wrong. But the truth, horses, permits, and cameras too slow to catch a moving carriage, is somehow stranger than the conspiracy, faster than the camera. Here's the number that should bother you. Across nearly 2 centuries of urban rebuilding, somewhere north of 60,000 major landmark structures, palaces, train stations, opera houses, entire fairground cities were torn down so fast that no complete photographic archive of them exists. Not because cameras did not exist, because the decision to demolish almost always outran the decision to document. This is not a single event. It repeats in city after city, decade after decade. Grand buildings goop, dazzle a generation, and then get erased on a timeline too short for anyone to properly grieve them. To understand why, you have to start with the strangest twist in the whole story: buildings that were never even meant to survive their own opening day. The cities built to die. Some of the most photographed buildings on Earth were designed for demolition before a single visitor walked through the doors. Chicago's 1893 World's Fair produced the so-called White City, a sprawling complex of domes, colonnades, and lagoons that looked like ancient Rome reborn in Illinois. Millions walked through it, and within a year, most of it was gone. Not stolen, not hidden, just built out of plaster and jute fiber over wood framing, meant from day one for the wrecking crew. The same trick repeated a few years later in Paris, where the 1900 Exposition Universelle built an entire palace of electricity out of the same disposable staff material, glowing with thousands of light bulbs for a single summer before crews tore it down within 2 years. San Francisco did it again in 1915, when the Panama Pacific Exposition raised its dazzling tower of jewels, covered in over 100,000 cut glass Novagums, only to dismantle it by early the following year. Monumental architecture, engineered to be temporary, photographed obsessively for a season, then reduced to scrap. Nobody had to hide any of this, since it was announced in the blueprints. But planned demolition on this scale was still rare. What came next was a man who did the same thing to an entire living city on purpose and called it progress. The man who gutted Paris on purpose. In 1853, Napoleon III handed Georges Eugene Haussmann a mandate to fix a city choking on cholera, and Haussmann answered by gutting it. Estimates vary, but historians generally agree he tore down somewhere between 20 and 40,000 buildings, displacing well over 100,000 residents to carve out the wide boulevards tourists photograph today. Entire medieval neighborhoods, some standing since before Notre Dame was finished, were erased inside 17 years. Haussmann himself described it as disemboweling old Paris, and he was not exaggerating. There was no conspiracy here, no cover-up. It was published policy, debated openly in the French press. An emperor's appointee had shown the world that a government could erase a city's memory simply by deciding to. Less than a century later, America would prove the same instinct could survive a single railroad company's balance sheet. The death that changed the law. New York's original Pennsylvania Station opened in 1910 as a cathedral of pink granite and steel, modeled on Roman baths, with a ceiling that made travelers feel like ants beneath the gods. By the 1950s, the railroad that owned it was losing money, and in 1963, with barely any public warning, the wrecking crews arrived. Photographers rushed in at the last possible moment, and the images of classical columns being dragged into scrap heaps became some of the most reproduced too-late photographs in American history. The public outcry was so severe, it directly produced New York's Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965 and pushed the federal government toward the National Historic Preservation Act. One building's death accidentally saved thousands of others. It also proved something uncomfortable, that preservation laws only ever seem to arrive after the loss, never before it, a lesson the federal government somehow ignored on a much larger scale just a few years later. The bulldozer. With a government budget, between 1949 and 1973, under a federal program called Urban Renewal, more than 2,000 construction projects rolled through nearly 1,000 cities. By the government's own estimates, roughly 600,000 housing units were cleared to make way for them. Historians who have studied the House of Representatives' own 1964 reports put peak annual displacement above 60,000 families in a single year alone. This was not random. Federal maps and local zoning decisions disproportionately targeted Black and immigrant neighborhoods. In Pittsburgh, the Lower Hill District, once one of the country's great jazz neighborhoods, lost roughly 1,300 buildings and saw away about 8,000 residents displaced in the mid-1950s just to make room for a civic arena. Flattened commercial strips, churches, and family homes that had stood for generations were often replaced with parking lots or highways that never delivered the promised renewal. Places like the Lower Hill weren't palaces or opera houses. They were row houses, tenements, corner stores, and churches, ordinary blocks where people actually lived. Nobody photographed a corner store the way they photographed a train station, so when the wrecking crews came for 600,000 homes like these, they erased something a camera was never pointed at in the first place. Not architectural pride, but the memory of a community that used to gather there. A federal check, a city council vote, and a demolition permit did the job faster than any conspiracy ever could. That quiet, bureaucratic efficiency is exactly what later gave Rossetto a much stranger explanation, one that skipped the paperwork entirely and reached for something far more dramatic. The theory that filled the silence. The roots of that explanation go back further than you'd expect, to Russian pseudo-history. In the 1970s and 80s, mathematician Anatoly Fomenko built an alternative timeline of world history he called the New Chronology, and the occultist Nikolai Levashov later expanded it into claims about a lost Slavic super-empire called Tartaria. For decades, this stayed a niche, mostly Russian-language fringe idea. Then, starting around 2016, English-language YouTube channels picked up the same bones and rebuilt them for a Western audience. They pointed at the very buildings in this story, the Beaux-Arts train stations, the ornate fair buildings, the flattened neighborhoods, and argued the official explanations just were not good enough. The result was the modern Tartaria theory, the claim that a single, technologically advanced global civilization once built the world's grandest architecture, only to be wiped out by a catastrophic mud flood and then systematically erased from the record by a massive government cover-up. Believers point to real, physical things, buildings with half-buried basement windows, as proof that a flood, not a foundation, put them underground. They point to eerily empty photographs of grand fairground cities as evidence that something was hidden from the crowds. The theory has massive, passionate communities behind it, tens of thousands of members strong on Reddit and Facebook, all convinced that official demolition records are just a smokescreen. It is a deeply compelling story, and it is also almost entirely wrong. But before we look at the actual evidence, let's be honest. If you've fallen down this rabbit hole, or if you think there's still a piece of this mystery the official history is ignoring, tell me why in the comments right now. Because the real explanation for these buildings turns out to be just as wild as the conspiracy: the secret history of mud and horses. Architectural historians who have actually investigated these claims keep landing on an unglamorous, everyday answer to the mystery: horses. Before paved roads and modern drainage systems, city streets were constantly flooded with a toxic cocktail of mud and manure. Buildings were engineered with raised ground floors and half-buried basements, specifically to keep that mess out of living and commercial spaces. The exact feature Tartaria believers point to as catastrophic flood avoidance was actually just brilliant 19th century public health design. Similarly, the supposedly identical grand architecture found across different continents isn't proof of one lost global empire. It is proof of a globalized education. The Beaux-Arts Second Empire training programs of the era churned out architects worldwide who all studied the exact same European textbooks, drafted the same classical columns, and exported those styles to every booming colony and trade port on Earth. Even the empty city photographs that look staged for a government cover-up have a simple explanation rooted in early technology. The chemistry of early camera plates required incredibly long exposure times. If a carriage or a pedestrian moved across the frame during a 5-minute exposure, they vanished completely from the final print. The streets weren't abandoned. The cameras were just too slow to catch the people walking them. None of this makes the loss of these buildings less tragic. It just means the explanation was never a secret. It was sitting in city council records, railroad ledgers, and federal housing reports the entire time, filed under budgets instead of conspiracies. Standing on borrowed time strip, away the mud floods and the hidden empires, and what is left is still remarkable. 60,000 or more genuinely significant landmark buildings, palaces, stations, opera houses, entire architectural showcases really were erased from the skyline faster than the public could process losing them, demolished by emperors, railroads, and city councils who rarely asked permission first. And underneath that number sits a far larger own. Over 500,000 ordinary homes cleared in the single wave of urban renewal, alone. Homes that almost never made it into a single photograph before the wrecking ball arrived. The mystery was never that these buildings disappeared. It is that so few people were watching closely enough in the moment to stop it. Somewhere in a city near you, a building worth remembering is standing on borrowed time right now, with nobody pointing a camera at it yet. The question this video started with was who is hiding these buildings? The real answer is that nobody had to. We just were not looking soon enough. The next time you scroll past an old photograph of some vanished train station or a boulevard that does not exist anymore, look a little closer. Somewhere behind that image is a permit, a budget line, or a decree that made the decision long before anyone thought to grab a camera. That is the real story hiding under all of this. Not a hidden empire, but how easily the present erases the past when nobody is watching closely enough. Somewhere inside that same pile of 60,000 lost buildings sits the one we are opening next, a demolition photograph that should not exist at all, because the building inside it was torn down 4 years before the camera that supposedly took the picture was even invented. You will find out exactly what happened and how in the next video.